Welcome to the Capitalist Corner. This is our 50th episode, and we have a great treat with us today. Not that it's great that Mark's not here. Of course, we'd rather have him. But in his place, we have the esteemed philosopher. He's a historian. He's a retired prosecutor. He's an author. Jim Valliant is with us today. Jim, welcome back.
Well, it's always great to be here, my brother. I'm so honored to be here for episode 50. Yeah, it is kind of a shame that Pellegrino can't join us and we can't give him a hard time. That's always fun. But I know you think he's on my side, having taken,
Yeah, we know. We know. But I'm going to get to that in a second. There's something else is a nice surprise for you. I think you're going to like it. But before that, let me just remind everybody that I also host a show called The Rational Egoist. We have a great episode out right now on psychopathy.
Yes.
Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll be posting an episode about living authentically, which is great. You should definitely check out my podcast, but you should also definitely go right now and hit the like button for this show. So, Jim, I have frequently said that you are perhaps the toughest debate opponent that I've ever had. And I'm bringing this up partly because I anticipate we may get into it a little today.
Maybe.
Now, so I submitted our debates to two of them to the artificial intelligence. Now, I'm going to tell you the treat in a second. So the time you and I debated constitutional interpretation, it ruled a draw. It said it all depends on which focus you choose to go by. They said that it said that you were more dynamic in your thinking, in applying constitutional realities to changing times, basically. But I was better if somebody's looking for an unchanging document in predictability.
And I would agree with chat.
I would too, which was great. It said that in the debate we had on value that we both presented our case very well, but it said I edged you out because you without demonstrating it equated value with good. I don't remember the exact argument that we had, but we did. But here's the convenient thing. The reason I say that you are the toughest debate opponent I've ever had is because you've shellacked me. The convenient thing for me is that there's no recording of said shellac.
Wise.
So, I mean, did they really happen? I don't know. I mean, you and I once had a debate about mental illness, and let me tell you, people, Jim Valliant utterly kicked my ass in this debate, so much so that I said, listen, there's no sense posting this.
Look, I mean, that was commenting on. They got the check, got it, AI got it right the first time. And the second time I can understand why they got it wrong. Because they
got it wrong?
Well, yeah, because they didn't understand the context of Galt's speech.
But in fairness, though, it meant what it does, and I was unable to post these in the other things, but I'm definitely going to be using this in the future, is it goes through an analysis of the entire debate and shows strengths, weaknesses. But the good thing is, Jim, is that it seemed to really like the both of us. Both of us are very logical, very grounded. So that was great.
We are, aren't we?
We are some splendid freaking people.
We are indeed.
But let me just say, I will not be submitting the analyses of debates and future debates for public analysis from Grok. I did that specifically in regard to these debates with Jimbob and Andrew Wilson, is because they're fundamentally dishonest people. And because they're dishonest people, and because their audiences are either dishonest or duped, and because they commit so many logical errors and so many misrepresentations, that I just wanted to have the most neutral arbiter I could find to analyze it. So that's why I did that.
And that long list of how Jimbob misrepresented your position.
Yes, and in fairness, it also said that I misrepresented him sometimes. It said 3 times, twice partial, and 3 times it said I did. Now there were things that I could take issue with everything I've seen, but by and large, I'm impressed with this. This artificial intelligence. Yeah,
I really am relatively impressed at the analysis. It's almost as though a neutral person is standing out there. I mean, they're not perfect, but it is kind of cool because you kind of get what in fact better than most neutral people out there listening, but you'd get a complete neutral analysis. It may be too neutral in some sense, maybe less than neutral in another sense, but I'm astonished at how well they do.
Yeah, one of the things, the issues that I have with it, there's actually two, is where one of them is that it frequently tells me that one of my weaknesses is an over-reliance on objectivism. But the problem is I'm arguing for objectivism.
Right.
The other thing is, in a debate I had with Stefan Kinsella, and I said off the bat, this refers to the debate that we had. I said I don't like Rand's definition of value as far as objective value goes, and I said that during the debate. So Grok deducted a point from me because it says Liebowitz is flawed because he conceded the point. But I, of course, didn't concede a point. But I can understand. But that's the type of error that the AI seems to make.
If the debate was about objectivism, saying that you relied too much on objectivism,
that's cuckoo. Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, but overall,
I don't get that one.
Yeah, but by and large, I am impressed. What I'm not impressed with, Jim, is what is going on in California. So I want to get a full analysis of this thing from multiple angles. But first, as somebody living in California, familiar with the terrain, I've been there once. In honor of you being here, I'm wearing my Old Town sweatshirt and my Old Town sweats, but I'm not going to stand up and show those. But so what is happening?
Well, starting on Friday night, of course, there was increasing violence. A major thoroughfare, the 101 freeway, the Hollywood freeway, which is one of the main freeways that runs right downtown LA, was completely blocked and shut off. Vehicles, mostly cop cars, but many private vehicles, were set on fire. They were throwing cinder blocks, pieces of concrete, rocks at police cars as they were driving. That's deadly force. And they were throwing fireworks and so forth. And, that's violence. That's violating the rights of another individual. Something in LA, downtown LA, a lot of the people whose lives they were disrupting or whose cars they were setting on fire were probably anti-Trumpers. So, that doesn't matter. The point, though, is you don't take out your cause on innocent people. Right. There is no justification. There is nothing that justifies that until you're ready to go to a full-scale revolution like our founding fathers. And Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration wrote out a whole moral defense of why they were doing it. He had a moral case to make on many fronts as to why we should go to revolution with Britain. And something, unless you're willing, and Ayn Rand had a very clear line, unless in fact the government is really violating due process and violating its own laws, unless there's a real censorship, a government censorship, and so long as we have a representative form of government, there is a peaceful means to change our system. Our basic system is pretty cool in many ways, and until and unless it becomes impossible to persuade and change people peacefully, and you're ready to go and do a full-on revolution, there is no excuse for violence at all. But violence against innocent people, which is what we were seeing here, or violence against cops, that is not justifiable. The roads are for driving. If you want a demonstration permit, you get a demonstration permit. These guys were unpermitted, and they were shutting down one of America's major highways through the downtown area of the second most populous city in the country. Now, that is a violation of innocent people's rights. I don't understand the moral and certainly cannot understand the legal justification for that. And it doesn't matter to me what the issue would be, whether it's the Ferguson riots of 2020, the Summer of Love, or whether it's immigration.
Ferguson, I think, was 2011, Jim.
Oh, thank you. 2011.
You're confusing your race riots.
I'm right. We're confusing. And in 1992, LA had, the riots with that guy who was arrested. I forget his name, too. Sorry, my memory getting older. My memory's getting older. But that one guy who was arrested kind of aggressively by the police, that set off riots. And of course, in the 1960s, we had all kinds of violence across the country, because of the Vietnam War and other issues. But, the point is that it doesn't matter to me what the issue is. Ayn Rand, for example, and me, after the event, she opposed the Vietnam War and the draft. The draft is a form of literal slavery. Young men were sent to a foreign hellhole to die and get maimed for life. Their whole lives were taken from them against their will. Now, that's a form of slavery. Now, I can imagine very few things that are more comprehensively rights violating. Ayn Rand very vigorously opposed that on moral and legal grounds. I mean, the 13th Amendment, in my view, is inconsistent with the draft, but the Supreme Court thinks otherwise. In any case, you can totally oppose on moral and legal grounds something, and that Ayn Rand still came out against any violent demonstrations. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. If we have a peace and guess what? The draft was eliminated with the help of one of her students, by the way, Martin Anderson. But the point is that we have a peaceful means of persuading people, changing their minds. And so long as that's the case. And so the minute the violence happens, it does not matter. Someone can say, Trump is, no, stop, over, I don't care. Separate issue. And in my mind, it separates out the issue, the cause. So no matter what we say about the cause that these people are rioting for, or stopping highways for, or setting fires for, or throwing rocks. I mean, I saw one guy hammering out pieces of the sidewalk to get concrete rocks to throw. Now, Friday was bad, Saturday was bad, and it was the LA police chief said, we are overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is what the LA police chief said. This is all before Trump even considered putting in the Marines and the National Guard into all of this. There was a failure on the part of law enforcement to handle this, and so they continued to happen. Last night, there was still a big demonstration, still fireworks and stuff used. Frozen water bottles were thrown, and fireworks were thrown, and so forth, and they were blocking roads. So, but things were a little better because the police are getting a better handle on it now. But even now, the Marines that were sent from 29 Palms out in the desert are still being trained in Seal Beach. And under existing law, without anything happening, the Marines can still protect federal buildings. And so it was hardly surprising that the federal detention center where immigrants are held was being protected by Marines. That's just under existing law.
Okay, so hold on now, Jim, because I'm pretty sure I know where you're going, but I don't want to get too far ahead of the whole thing. So there's a principle involved here that I think is important that you alluded to. Just because, for instance, that you are condemning the rioters does not mean you're defending the Trump administration.
Absolutely not.
And I think, right, I think that there's a lot of people that have a difficult time not picking a side, right? They can't see that all sides in a situation are wrong. For instance, you oppose, as I do, on constitutional grounds, federal immigration laws.
It's just not in the Constitution.
Right. So ICE should not be running around California snatching people up. We can agree on that. But we can also agree that the proper response is to not violate the rights of other people by throwing rocks at them, blocking traffic, that sort of thing.
No cause can justify that. And so
right.
The minute you do that, you separate out, I don't care about your issue. Now
yes.
I don't, and so when people bring up the issue in that context, I think they're morally confused. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are friends of mine, who are bringing up that context. Trump clearly overstepped things when he threatened Newsom and Bass for arrest. He was going to arrest.
That's what he claimed.
Now, he hasn't arrested him, but that rhetoric is over the top, Mr. Trump. I would also make a distinction between existing law that's on the books and the Supreme Courts have signed off on, and law that I think is immoral or unconstitutional.
Right.
Just because I think it's immoral and unconstitutional doesn't mean it's the existing law of the land. So Obama, for example, deported 3 million people, the vast majority of whom were perfectly otherwise law-abiding people.
Right. And we didn't see these riots then.
And the due process was pretty much the same. Now, I know Trump has changed a couple of things and is pushing the envelope on those things.
Well, sending people to prisons.
Well, yeah, but if you fail to show up for your asylum hearing, that gives you a prima facie reason, even if you haven't had a deportation order. If you've overstayed your deportation order, if you've overstayed your visa, the federal law already says they get precious little due process. I don't like that. I don't like that aspect. Even if we were to have immigration laws, I myself think if I could rewrite the Constitution, I myself think we should have a border and we should screen for criminals and terrorists, and criminal aliens should be deportable. Now, that is a very small fraction of the 11 or 12
I
million.
agree with you, by the way.
And that's a very small fraction of the 11 or 12 million people they say came in under
Right.
Biden. And so, and they say they're focusing on the worst of the worst. We can't deport 12 million people or 20 million total illegals. They say that. So that's why they're focused on criminals. Now, under existing law, and I think another thing we should be careful to do is if the law is rotten and Trump is enforcing it, the existing law is the problem, not just Trump. And this is long-standing existing law. When you illegally enter the United States for the first time, it's considered a civil, not a criminal matter, even though it means they're kicking your ass out of the country. And you only get a brief hearing in front of a judge. And they can just quickly take judicial notice of the fact that you don't have a visa and that you were not legally admitted. Biden ignored the law. Now, it's a law I don't like, but Obama didn't, Clinton didn't, Eisenhower didn't. They deported like hell, and they were Democrats. Or Eisenhower, who was hardly
kind of a Democrat,
but hardly a Republican by the standards of that day. But the point, though, is that Biden did something different, and the demands today that we ignore ICE, kick out ICE, that would be an affront to federal law, which says the federal government shall deport these aliens. When I was a prosecutor and I read something in the California Penal Code that said the prosecutor shall, I took that as my marching orders. That was something I could not ignore, evade, get around, even if I didn't like the law. And so when Biden ignored immigration laws that I think are rotten. Now, mind you, I agree that our immigration system is immoral, unconstitutional, and rotten. But when Biden ignored altogether the existing immigration laws and let in maybe 12 million people, that was, from the perspective of Trump's people, come on, he's violating the law. Sure. And there's no doubt that Biden ignored Supreme Court rulings, et cetera, et cetera. So to say that this president is lawless or a threat to democracy does drop a certain context. Now, when Trump does ignore, for example, a Supreme Court order that says, well, you can't force it, but you have to facilitate it, effectuate it. But they overturned that part of the district court. But they said you have to facilitate it. And you remember me bitching and moaning. He didn't lift an effing finger to even facilitate it. And that was too.
I don't mind when you bitch and moan, Jim. It's okay.
He didn't even facilitate it. But now, of course, Abrego Garcia is back in the country because they extradited him. Okay. And so there's no more forceful way to get someone from a foreign country than to file criminal charges and ask for his extradition.
Right. And we hopefully will get to that. But there's so much in what you said, right? I had a slight debate about this issue with the legendary scholar Richard Epstein, right?
Yeah.
Obviously way out of my depth when debating the Constitution with Professor Epstein. But in this area, I believe I'm correct, because what he believes in is what he calls the prescriptive Constitution. And that is that once you have established law that becomes precedent for, enough time, then it's basically like retroactively constitutional now, is what he believes. This is part of the so many of our problems stem from this want of principle, right? Because the president takes an oath to the Constitution. The Supreme Court often violates the Constitution or misinterprets it. So then what's a president to do? I believe if Joe Biden would have come forward during his administration and said, look, on principle, these immigration restrictions are unconstitutional. My duty is to the Constitution of the United States. I'm not going to enforce them. I think he'd have an argument, but that's not what he does. He just implements the policy that he happens to want. There's no principle behind it.
The left love, even more than Professor Epstein, who's very often right about things, the left even more are legal realists who think, well, when you've got an established precedent, over a not big enough period of time, we just go with it. You know my position. I am an old-fashioned, unreconstructed, do it by the rules of legal analysis. And that means the plain meaning, the original intent, trump any precedent. In fact, when you have Supreme Court justices before the Senate, they'll say, what are they'll ask you, can precedent, you believe in stare decisis, which means you go by precedent. Are there circumstances when the Supreme Court can change even important precedent? They just changed Roe versus Wade, for example. Yes. And what are the standards? Well, when the plain meaning, and they'll themselves admit, well, when the plain meaning and original intent of the document say something else, we have to correct ourselves and correct the precedent. But on so many things, whether it's the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, I mean, thank God they overturned Plessy versus Ferguson on equal protection. Or, and I can go on, the Commerce Clause. They have warped that thing out of any kind of meaning and a definition, so the Supreme Court is filled with lousy precedents. And we're living in a world, especially with the Commerce Clause, of all kinds of lousy law. They made up this power of Congress to regulate immigration from whole cloth.
Right. You know, and said the court said it's part of the sovereign power or something.
Okay, well, you could do that with anything. And they used international law, and they went back to James I or Henry II in English law. Well, that ain't going to cut it. That doesn't do it under our legal system.
No.
So we have to go by the Constitution. If I was on the Supreme Court, I would be a big fly in the ointment, because I would be constantly saying, no, we actually have to go by what Madison says the Constitution means and what the Constitution plainly says.
So, okay, so I want to know, not under my theory of interpretation of the Constitution, which differs slightly from yours. I mean, you and I are probably going to agree 99.9% of the time, right? So it's not that big of a difference. But under the existing Constitution, as you interpret it, I want to address two big issues. Gavin Newsom says he does not want the National Guard activated. If I'm remembering correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while, I don't read the Constitution every day, but I believe the National Guard is supposed to be called up in cases of insurrection or invasion. Is that right?
I just so happen to have. And
you know what's crazy? I was downstairs. I sleep in the basement is where my bedroom is. And I have my pocket copy of the Constitution. And I said, I got to bring this up with me. But I was in such a hurry. I'm like a chicken with its head cut off. And then I'm here and I said, damn, I don't even have it.
So let us repair to the Constitution.
That's what we shall repair to.
Yes. Article the 1st, Section 8. I think it's like Clause 15 or something. So it's down the list. But it's in Section 8 of Article 1. And it reads literally as follows, verbatim. The Congress has the power to, quote, provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, that's federal law in general, suppress insurrection, and repel invasions. Congress has power to call militias, quote, to provide for the organizing, arming, and disciplining of the militia, and for governing any such part of them that may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of officers and the authority of training the militia according to discipline prescribed by Congress. In 1807, Congress used, in 1807, under good old Tom Jefferson, who wasn't a big fan of government power, and before we had all these federal criminal statutes, they passed a thing called the
Insurrection Act.
And it has been used to put down labor disputes. It's been used to enforce civil rights laws. It's been used in even natural disasters. And Bush didn't do it, but he threatened to do it when Katrina came through New Orleans. Biden said he would do it against he was going to invoke it against Texas when Texas was trying to keep out when he was ignoring federal immigration.
Okay, so constitutionally, this isn't even an executive power, right? It's in Article 1, so it's legislative.
It gives the president the power.
Okay, but then that comes to an argument about whether or not Congress has the right to delegate congressional authority to the president.
Well, it's under Article 2, the president is the commander of the National Guard when they're called up under law. So the Congress said under these circumstances, the president can call them up, and that's perfectly consistent with the president's Article 2 power. He takes charge of the state militias when
they're called up,
when it's legal for him to do so. And the Insurrection Act can be used, for example, in labor disputes. That's not even
okay. Do you think the Insurrection Act is constitutional? That, I think, is the question, because I don't think Congress has the right to delegate their authority to the president. And here's the problem. Let me just put it this way, Jim. How many times have conservatives and people like the aforementioned Richard Epstein complained about Congress delegating its authority to the executive branch? In the executive branch, we have now all these agencies that are basically legislating because Congress has delegated its authority. So I don't think that they ought to be doing that. But even if they do, let's just go from there. Even if they do, there's not an invasion. There's not an insurrection taking place.
Is there a violation of federal law? That's all it takes. The article, Section 8, says that Congress will determine the rules under which the militia can be nationalized, in effect. The state militias can be nationalized. Article 1, Section 8. Congress makes those rules. Article 2 suggests that when that happens, the president is the guy who can do it. So unlike a delegation of tariff authority, here it's really clear. Congress has the power. It doesn't say anywhere in Article 2 that when Congress does this, the president has the power. This is different. When the Constitution specifically does say that when Congress says it's time to nationalize the state militias, the president is the commander of them. So here we have a specific constitutional authorization of the president to control the state militias, to federalize them, as they say, when the Congress passes a law that tells you when you can nationalize the militia.
And what does the Insurrection Act say? Do you know?
The Insurrection Act very much echoes the language of the Constitution to enforce the laws of the Union. That is to say, it is against federal law to attack local cops. It is against federal law to do violence against the LAPD. So right there, just right there, we have a violation of federal law. Now, it also talks about insurrection. You know, Nancy Pelosi and many Democrats were complaining that the National Guard wasn't used on January 6th. Well, if that was an insurrection, then surely what's happening in LA is an even bigger insurrection. And so I think that I think this is going to be a no-brainer actually in court. Maybe they can find, even though the federal district courts, even in a liberal place like California, might not agree with Gavin Newsom, who's suing Trump over his use of the National Guard. But I think under existing law, the Supreme Court will have an easy call on that one. This is something Trump can do.
Okay.
I am not alone here. I've got a swath of legal, constitutional people and former federal prosecutors who agree with me on this. Andy McCarthy on down. And I think this is a no-brainer under existing law.
Okay.
The president has the authority.
I want to back up. First of all, we have 24/7 live AZ Skies. He puts not an invasion with three question marks. He says, seriously, no, AZ Skies. Under the Constitution, what invasion means is a foreign country with a foreign army entering the country. This is not an invasion. I understand we can cherry pick a modern dictionary and find a definition of invasion that comports with any act where somebody imposes their will on you or some such thing. But constitutionally, and I would highly suggest that the author of the Constitution, one James Madison, be advised on this, or not advised, go to for advisement. Read his report of 1800. He lays out what an invasion is. You can also go to the Constitutional Convention debates and read about it. You can go to the Federalist Papers and read about it. No, sir, this is not an invasion.
We mean a military invasion, like
yes,
invaded Poland.
Now, my good friend,
Britain attempted to invade the United States during the War of 1812. Those were invasions.
Yes, an insurrection would have been the South, for instance. That can be argued was an insurrection.
Right.
Whether they had the right to secede is a different story. They did not have the right to form a confederation.
But when the South takes over Fort Sumter, that's an insurrection.
Right.
You're taking over a military base.
Yeah. Now here this is one of the great ironies of my life. I'm sitting here in ex-con hosting a talk show, and one of my best friends is my co-host, who is a retired prosecutor, and another one of my best friends is a cop who used to bust me, and he's in the audience here. And lo and behold, it comes time to disagree with both of them, and it's interesting because I am the law guy now. Thomas Pentelo says, Michael, it is an insurrection and it will continue until they are shut down and people go to jail for touching a cop. Thomas, with all due respect, hitting a cop, assaulting a cop is not an insurrection. An insurrection is an attempt to overthrow the existing government. This is not that. If you go by strict letter of the law, by the way, Jim, strict letter of the law, it's far more arguable that January 6th was an insurrection than that this is an insurrection.
Well, wait a minute. If they're saying that and this is what the Democrats are actually saying, well, if ICE wasn't doing what Trump is making them do, mostly under existing law. Now, if I'm rebelling against a law in a violent way, that can well be seen as insurrection. In other words, you don't have a right to just say, I'm going to use violence because I don't like this federal law. Even if you're not attempting to overthrow the whole government, you're overthrowing the order, the legal order, the rule of law in the United States. That would qualify in my mind as an insurrection. Now, the question there, I'm not denying that there is an open factual question as to whether or not January 6th and the riots in LA are an actual insurrection. But it seems to me whether you're trying to actually overthrow the whole federal government all at once, and if that's the case, January 6th, while it was an act of insurrection, wasn't much of an insurrection. But when you're trying to say, ICE, get out of here, when there is existing law and this precedent, whether you and I agree it's constitutional or moral, you're attacking the federal legal system, that too could be regarded as an insurrection.
Yeah, I think that's codswallop.
But remember what Section 8 says, or the laws of the Union. So you can use the National Guard even because federal laws are being broken. And that is included in the Insurrection Act of 1807, which pretty much just echoes the language of the
current federal insurrection law is what I'm talking about. We can if we are going to do that, then anytime somebody, when a government comes to arrest them, says, fuck that, I disagree with that.
No.
And uses violence. It has to be, according to here, insurrection is an organized and usually violent act of revolt or rebellion against an established government or governing authority of a nation state or other political entity by a group of its citizens or subject, any act engaging in such a revolt. That's just one. The last time, this has the Bundy standoff. Evidently, these people, I found this. Okay. Rebellion Act 18 U.S. Code 2383. An insurrection is any act of rebellion or insurrection against the U.S. government constitutes a serious federal crime. I hate when they do this. That's so ambiguous.
That seems to support me. That is
because this is what the law. That was just a headline.
Go after the whole government, or can I just go after ICE?
Well, hold on. This is what it says.
In an organized way, not just one guy. See, I want to go back to what you said. Anytime someone gets arrested, no, and resists, no. It has to be organized, widespread violence.
Yes.
Aimed at the overturning of some federal agency or law would seem to me to already be at least knocking on the threshold of what an insurrection is.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where
remember, it also says.
Hold on. Well, I'm going to read the exact law in a second, Jim. But hold on, because Thomas is in the things here, and he's going to get me all wound up. He says throwing rocks at cops who are doing a job is effed up. Yes, of course. There's a lot of things in this world that are effed up. It doesn't make them insurrections by law.
But
that's the problem.
A violation of the laws of the Union. Section 8
this is the law. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereof, shall be. I have seen nothing. Are there demands? Are these people demanding that the federal law be overthrown?
They are fighting the enforcement of existing law.
They're fighting. First of all, half of these people are not even. Okay, hold on.
From LA says, well, if they just pull out ICE enforcement in LA, well, wait a minute here. ICE enforcement in LA you're saying get rid of this existing federal law and don't enforce it, or there will be violence. Now,
they've said, hold on, Jim, hold on. You can't just say that. Yeah, whether or not they want ICE gone is not the issue. Are they attempting to overthrow law is the issue at hand. And now, I've
And
spent. Oh,
it's a violation of federal law just to do violence against local cops.
are they trying to overthrow the law? Are you arguing for some kind of it's implicit?
No, all you have to do is violate federal law to come within that Section 8 thing.
If that's the case, right? If that's the case, then it's clear as day that January 6th was an insurrection.
Yeah, well,
clear as day.
Yeah, as I said, it was an act of insurrection. It wasn't likely to succeed, so it wasn't much of an insurrection, but I concede January 6th was an insurrection. I also concede that when you've got an organized, widespread violence that is trying to stop federal law from being enforced, well, you see, that's precisely what.
Hold on, but there's a difference, Jim, between rioting to stop federal law from being enforced and trying to overthrow federal law are not the same thing.
Well, what we want is ICE out, because the signs they were holding at the protests for the last 4 days said F ICE, abolish ICE, and if there's a peaceful means of doing that. And they were violating federal law by attacking local cops. So
wait a second, hold on. Wait a second here. Wait a second. Anytime someone attacks local cops, that's a federal offense?
It can be.
Hold on. I don't think it is, Jim. Whether it can be or not, I don't think it is.
Oh, no, it is.
I know so many people who got arrested for assault on police officer, and it's never been a federal offense.
Okay, now wait. There's two different things here. There can be overlapping jurisdictions on things, and if it is just a single,
they can have concurrent jurisdiction. Yeah.
And when it's just a single cop or something, or a small thing, they'll normally let the locals do it, even though the feds could charge you with doing violence against a police officer, period. Now, when it's big and organized like this, that is exactly when the local authorities will often defer to federal authorities to say, "Oh no, come in." This was,
but they didn't. But they didn't. They didn't.
But
the local authorities actually have done the opposite and said they don't want them.
But concurrent jurisdiction is a matter of each side's discretion. In other words, the federal government doesn't have to wait for the locals to call.
No. But Jim, you just said they can ask them, and I'm just pointing out that they have specifically said they didn't.
Let me put it this way: the discretionary interaction is what I'm talking about, not the legal authority. The feds can come in if cops are being attacked. Full stop.
Okay, I don't know the specific law to that. All I'm saying is that it is
practice. They want.
Okay, all right. My only point here is that this is a stretch to call this an insurrection. It's a stretch, and not only that, but here's the problem. This is where, and I want to get to the next thing. I don't want to just you and I bitch back and forth all day about this. But now Trump. Now you mentioned earlier, right, that the Marine Corps can go into basically any jurisdiction in the country to protect federal buildings, federal property, that sort of thing. They cannot interfere in local issues unless the Insurrection Act is referenced. If it's what's the word I'm looking for, Jim? Help me out here. Invoked. If it's put into play, invoked, yeah. Unless it's invoked.
So far, the Marines have been only used to protect, like,
right. But this is my next question for you now. Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, send the Marine Corps into American streets where the local government does not want that. Now, as an aside from the legal stuff that you're talking about, this is from the same people who bitch and bitch and bitch and bitch and bitch for as long as I can remember. I mean, let's go back to National Review, for God's sake, right? States' rights, states' rights, states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. Unless we don't like states' rights.
Back in the 1960s, to enforce the desegregation of schools, they used, in the 50s for sure, Eisenhower did this, Johnson did it. The last time the Insurrection Act was officially invoked was to shut down a situation where the states did not want them in, and it could hardly be called an insurrection. So, by your definition of insurrection, That's why I keep referring to a violation of the laws of the Union, which is what the Constitution says. And it includes that. So the Insurrection Act, if federal law is being violated, such as the civil rights laws, and that's the last time it happened, and the Democrats were all on board. And look at this. Biden was considering, now people say Kristi Noem's a hypocrite because she opposed when Biden suggested using the National Guard to stop Texas from stopping people from coming in because federal law trumps state law.
Which, by the way,
but Biden was thinking about
because Biden's an ass.
By your life.
Yeah, no, but here's the problem. If we actually are originalist in the Constitution, then we would say it actually is Texas that should be enforcing immigration law.
Texas,
it's not the federal government.
Said if anyone has the authority, it's the state.
It's the state, and they did early on in the country's history, right? So, and this is two things, Jim.
Thick irony, isn't it?
It is because they're all hypocrites.
Are labor disputes insurrections?
I would say no. But
is fighting desegregation of schools an insurrection? Those were times that the Insurrection Act has been used.
Yeah, I get it. But we've also both agreed that the Supreme Court and federal law often screw up. I would personally argue, however desirable it may be, for instance, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is largely unconstitutional.
Well, the parts about outlawing private discrimination surely are. They use the Commerce Clause.
Right. Now, here's the problem. When you say that, people say, oh, so you're for private racism. No, I'm not. But the question isn't about what Michael Leibowitz likes. The question.
But should it be legal? Should it be a federal crime? No. But the point is, we do have it. And it has been invoked for that purpose.
Yeah, I want to just state something, Jim. There's two things, Jim, right? The first one is this. This is an excellent illustration of what we started with, about how people have a difficult time seeing that multiple sides to an equation are wrong. So 24/7 Live AZ Skies comes in with this, as if anyone here would ever advocate for this jackass Tim Walz, right? He says, Tim Walz set armed paintball armies loose on his citizens on their front porches for not wearing a mask. Yeah, he shouldn't have.
Right.
Those lockdowns should never have occurred.
Gavin Newsom used the state militia to arrest people on the beach during the COVID.
Yeah, that's absolutely absurd that they would do that. But the fact that the Democrats abuse law, the fact that they support a living constitution, doesn't then mean the Republicans, it's okay if they do it. They're all wrong. They're all going against the founding principles.
I mean, Obama, like I say, deported 3 million people, the vast majority of whom were perfectly law-abiding, peaceful people. And he did so in a variety of ways. They had failed to show at their federal hearing. They overstayed their visa. There was an existing deportation order. And your first entry into the United States is a civil. They call it a civil case, even though they kick you from the country. You get a brief hearing in front of a judge, and it goes like that. Did you come in legally? No.
Now, Jim, I want to move on to this I can't pronounce his name, Abrego Garcia. But first, I want to just say, this is an area, right, where you can see the tension between my method of interpretation and yours, which, according to Grok, we draw it in our debate on. But the point is that I'm far more no implication. You go strict by what the thing says, whereas you allow for some measure of expansion based on implications in
plain meaning.
Plain meaning, but
the implications of plain meaning.
But the problem is the plain meaning. The problem is the plain meaning that I agree. I just say it should be plain meaning as was understood at the time of adoption, where you more are allowed for a broader idea.
The wrinkle with us is, while the Constitution may say to enforce federal law, just to enforce federal law, you can bring in the National Guard and nationalize it under the regulation of Congress. And when that happens, Article 2 says the president's in charge. Now, the federal law in question here, we agree, is unconstitutional.
Which adds another problem to the situation.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Very complex.
Yeah. And as usual, you and I have brought the most brilliant analysis known to the podcast sphere or the information sphere. No one's going to get any better. You can't do it. I don't care where you go. Jim and I rock. And by the way, you can see us both on my podcast. We do regular segments on all types of topics: history, philosophy, economics, libertarianism, whatever. And soon, Jim, we have to do the episode on logical fallacies.
Oh, yeah.
But first, this Abrego Garcia thing. So this guy was given a hold, said that they could not deport him to El Salvador. The Trump administration deports him anyway, concedes it was an error, that they shouldn't have done it, ordered by the Supreme Court to do everything they could to facilitate his return. They in turn said, no, they can't do it. They can't get him back. The president of, or whatever he is, of El Salvador said, no, I'm not doing it. Lo and behold, now he's coming back. And he's been charged with human smuggling, human trafficking, that sort of thing.
And they're considering other charges.
Yes. Now, here's the thing. If he's given due process of law and it's proven that he's guilty, I have no issue with it. My problem here is that it seems highly political. The evidence that we've seen is very sketchy. So much so that the local prosecutor that was going to do the case resigned over the issue. Now, as a prosecutor, Jim, former prosecutor, that is a big freaking deal to resign as a prosecutor.
It is. I don't know what the context of this prosecutor's own politics are, so just have a little asterisk on that. But I agree. He didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole and quit. He felt so strongly about it. And but let's put the pieces all together here. Look, you and I agree that federal immigration laws are unconstitutional, and the way they are immoral is currently immoral.
Yes,
we agree with that. There was a deportation order that said you could deport him anywhere but El Salvador because he was illegally in the country. And the reason why they said you couldn't deport him to El Salvador is because he faced potential violence against another gang. They found by clear and convincing evidence that he was, quote, associated with this gang. It doesn't, unfortunately, under our immigration law, that's all they had to do. Now, Trump has since changed the designation of MS-13 to a terrorist organization. Now, I question that.
Complete bullshit.
Complete BS. But on the other hand, under Trump's new executive order, that would make the new deportation hearing, forget what happens in the criminal case, a breeze for poor Mr. Abrego. Say poor Mr. Abrego. He's not a winner. You know, anyone, and this is a problem that I think a lot of people get into. They try and defend the character of Republicans.
And it's entirely irrelevant.
It's entirely irrelevant. But the point is, he may be a wife beater. He may be, all kinds of other things. But the point, though, is that when the Supreme Court, the district court said you have to effectuate and facilitate his return for due process and a new hearing, the Supreme Court overruled the effectuate part and said you have to facilitate. And you recall I got mad because Trump didn't do anything to facilitate it at all.
Yes.
And but at one level, if you're in a foreign country, what, are we going to go to war with the country because they don't return a person? The most effective means of effectuating it that the federal government has is to charge him with a crime and ask for extradition.
Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. Officially, no.
Short officially, of war with El Salvador.
So hold on. You think that if Donald Trump would have told the president of El Salvador, hey, we want our guy back, if he just took that step, you think that guy's going to say, no, let's go to war?
When you charge a crime, you need to review it. And before they had said to him, and before that, let me add to that. Indeed, you have to keep it secret. If I'm a prosecutor or a detective and I'm investigating a crime, it is against the law for me to reveal our investigation because who knows who we might slander.
But they didn't have to do that. All I'm saying,
but the point is,
the best way to force them to send them back, you're right. But if Trump would have just said, listen, send the guy back, they would have sent him back.
That's right. So he did nothing to facilitate.
That's what I mean.
But currently, he's doing the strongest thing he can do to effectuate.
To make sure, to force it is the most effective way. I agree with that.
Then nothing short of war could effectuate it. So the point is, he's doing the strongest thing he can do short of war to get him back to effectuate it. You're right. He said he could do nothing to facilitate it, and he didn't even try. In that sense, Trump thumbed his nose, at least for the last 2 months, at that part of a Supreme Court order. Now I think he's in compliance with that part of the Supreme Court order. A little late, But
Well,
you
yeah, it
can't say he's
obviates
in
the whole issue,
violation of the
really,
Supreme
right?
Court's order on that. His government has actually effectuated his return. He's in the United States, and whatever happens in the criminal trial, however awful our immigration laws are, I suspect the new immigration hearing will go like a breeze and say he gets deported even to El Salvador. Now, that's an unfortunate thing about our immigration laws, perhaps, but ladies and gentlemen, it's existing immigration law. Trump did not write that piece of crap law.
What
And
do you think of jury nullification, Jim? I mean, it's relevant, and I think maybe some people may not get the immediate implication, but I know you do. What do you think about jury nullification?
let me put it this way, I have a nuanced opinion on it. I think it's generally wrong. The instruction that jurors get is whether you agree with the law or not, you are to apply the law to the facts you find to be true. And the judge will say that. And Lord knows, on multiple occasions, I have argued to a jury, whatever you think about this law, right? You have to apply the law. And the judge, and if any defense attorney starts objecting, the judge, no, Mr. Valliant's right. Now, morally speaking, do I think, and legally are there arguments that you could make that go back that say jury nullification is correct? I like law and order. I like due process of law. I like that laws aren't applied in an uneven way. So generally speaking, I'm opposed to jury nullification. I believe, though, in extreme cases of injustice, the jury, that it is a check on unjust laws enforcement at all. So in certain cases where I've heard of what was clear jury nullification, I have to admit I'm on the side of the jury nullifiers. And that's a moral position on my part more than it is,
Right.
let's say, a constitutional one. Does
See,
that make
this,
sense?
Jim, it does, because this is a tension that comes in my own thinking, where I've struggled because it's a hard thing to come to grips with.
Absolutely.
Because I believe in the rule of law. I'm very Hayekian when it comes to the rule of law, or the law, going by the rule of law, when proper, is what facilitates freedom. We cannot just have each individual arbitrarily deciding what the law is. I agree with that. But in Judgment at Nuremberg, there was the situation where, the judges, the lawmakers, whatever, they were all on trial, and their claim was, look, we followed the law. And I thought that was such it was a masterful movie anyway.
Masterful.
But that tension there with, I'm somebody that says you have to follow the law, but in this case, I'm saying, no, these guys should not have followed the law. Now, that's obviously a very extreme
But
case.
what does a judge do? What a judge does is he quits. If the Nazis passed laws that say we sterilize Jews, or there can be no miscegenation with Jews, what you do
That's
is you
true.
say, this law is so immoral that I can no longer adjudicate cases under the law of Germany anymore. And so the Burt Lancaster character, what he should have done is quit. And that's implied when Spencer Tracy, the judge at Nuremberg.
Yeah, he was awesome.
He was awesome. He said,
his speech at the end, oh my God. Yeah.
When did it happen? The first time you enforced one of these evil racist laws in Germany. The first time. One, it doesn't take 100. It doesn't take 1,000.
Okay.
The first time, Judge.
But now apply that principle, right? Let's say 10 years from now. This is more philosophical than anything. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting we have to think through the entire thing. I've been thinking on it for years and still struggle.
Right.
Let's say 10 years from now, Leonard Peikoff was right, that the ominous parallels are here. And the United States has really devolved into something akin to Nazi Germany. Somebody gets up and says the first time we enforced one of these unjust immigration laws allowed for it.
Then you can't work for the government morally.
It's a very tough thing, right?
Look, the Weimar Republic had screwed itself into a pretty rotten position in the early 30s.
You had to pronounce it Weimar, didn't you?
I did Weimar, isn't it the Weimar?
Of course it's correct, but you got all over me when I pronounced Cicero Cicero according to the proper Latin pronunciation. You went sick on me all over social media, and now you're going to sit here on my show and say Weimar. Yes, and Wagner. What about Wagner? What a composer Wagner was.
Well, he ain't Wagner. It wasn't the Wiener Republic either. I mean, it was a wiener of a republic, but but the point is, though, the choices in the early 30s, the strongest parties were really either the communists and Bolshevik supported communists, mind you, versus the Nazis. Now, what kind of a choice did that give? No, you don't participate in the government. The government becomes evil the minute and the minute Hitler comes into power and starts using emergency powers to take over and become a totalitarian. You flee the country, you rebel, you certainly quit the government if you're an agent of the government, like a judge enforcing laws, anti-Semitic laws that are now coming down the pike. No, when both sides are, unfortunately, Dr. Peikoff is correct. He said it would take slower than in Germany, and he's right. But what we are witnessing over the last 40 plus years since he wrote that book is a fascist convergence on both sides of the aisle. The free speech is ignored by the left. Capitalism is ignored by the right. What's left of freedom? What's left of America? We're heading awful fast in a direction of fascism. And I have to say, history has vindicated Dr. Peikoff in saying that we're, at least, even if more slowly, our culture is heading us down in a direction, our politics are heading us down in a direction towards fascism. That is a sad fact. Now, when do we cross the line? When does it become, because we've had really horrible rights in American history.
Yeah.
We've had really horrible. The draft is slavery, in my view, under the 13th Amendment.
Sure.
Abortion laws. I mean, abortion and draft laws, the government is saying, we own your life.
What about the war on drugs?
The war on drugs. Like I've said many times, you know where the violations of the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments happen? It's in drug laws. You know where government corruption, police corruption happens? It's in drug laws. And it violates the rights of individuals. It is horrible. And when you talk about a single thing over time, that is probably the greatest violation in my lifetime certainly by the federal government, domestically, of rights violation. But COVID was totalitarian in its scope,
yes.
even though it lasted only for so long. So we've had all manner of laws that strike me as dictatorial violations of fundamental rights. And did Ayn Rand, when she opposed the draft, when Ayn Rand until Roe versus Wade, because there were abortion laws in I think every state when she was alive against abortion. So no, she didn't say take to the streets and throw concrete at cop cars or set fire to cop cars or private cars. So if someone's private car gets set on fire in LA, there's no excuse to take it out on innocent civilians, one. And two, we haven't reached the point where censorship has been widespread. Now, have we increasingly have the government used threats of antitrust law? And I'm talking about Republicans using the threat of antitrust law against social media. Did Biden privately meet with them and say, hey, suppress
the same thing? Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that is censorship. And the more real sense, but we're having this conversation. And when we have a real censorship, or when there really is no representative form of government, or when the government starts systematically violating its own laws, and for that we need judicial review. When that goes away, and those were Ayn Rand's tests, by the way, the breakdown of due process altogether, this imposition of a real. Now, was censorship going away in her lifetime? She bitched properly about the FCC and their goddamn fairness doctrine on television. The federal government has no business determining the content of television or the internet,
which many conservatives now implicitly support when they talk about, left wing this and left wing that. They want equal representation. All right, Jim, we're just about out of time. Jim, you are one of the best thinkers on capitalism that I've come across. You bring a moral perspective, you bring a constitutional perspective, an economic perspective, and you understand how they're all integrated. So what I want you to do is to give us a relevant to everything we've been talking about capitalist thought of the day, and you got to do it off the top of your head. Sorry.
Capitalism is, as Ayn Rand defined it, and as I think it has to be understood, capitalism is the only system consistent with individual rights and their defense. And that means all individual rights, Individual rights is what capitalism is all about. So taking out your beef when there is no censorship, I mean, that individual right is still significantly there, and you live in a country where you can persuade and change the laws, that is the operation of capitalism. But the destruction of and capitalism is private property, as I've said before. But when what capitalism means and implies is respecting the rights of others. So our federal government does not respect the rights of peaceful immigrants to be here. That is a violation of capitalism. Full separation. When the people protesting it violate the rights of others to drive on a highway or to have their car not burned, that is a violation of capitalism, an obvious violation of private property rights. There is no justification morally to violate the rights, individual rights. It is because individual rights are the foundation of capitalism.
Jim, you are wonderful. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, occasionally here, as you can see, but on your podcast, The Rational Egoist. I'm
Thank
also
goodness.
a very frequent person on the Ayn Rand Center UK podcasts. I do seminars for them on Peikoff courses and the constitutional law, by the way. And I'm very active on Facebook, answering questions almost every day.
Thank you so much. And everybody else, make sure you hit the like button. Make
Yes.
sure you go to AmericanCapitalistParty.org. Make sure that you watch my podcast, The Rational Egoist. And in honor of my great usual co-host, Mark Pellegrino, remember to always check your premises. We'll be back tomorrow with Mark. Take care.